Welcome to the Western Bound podcast series with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of this series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled Feeding the Body of Light. The talk was given by Clelia Lewis on September 27th, 2025 via Zoom. Clelia is a freelance editor specializing in spiritual teachings, self-development, and memoir, and a practitioner in the lineage of Lee Lozowick, Yogi Ramsuratkumar, and Swami Papa Ramdas. In this presentation, she considers reality as a field of light, and each of us as bodies of light that come into and out of existence. She discusses teachings by the Ayurvedic physician and author Robert Svoboda on the influence of Rahu in Jyotish astrology, of deception, confusion, and inflation of power and ego in the world today. Clelia reads and comments on some of Martine Prechtel's writings on the shamanic perspective of the function of human beings to remember the gods who give us life. She talks about her experience with her spiritual teacher and lineage, and of feeding the light in the way that we relate to that which is in front of us. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it, or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Clelia Lewis.
Feeding the Body of Light, that title. When it came to me, it just felt like it really described how I've come to relate to my life and my connection to my path, my connection to the world, to my family, and how all of these work together. This idea of feeding the light, on the one hand, it's a poetic way of describing what I feel like I'm doing right now in my practice, but I think it's also very literal. So 15 years ago, my teacher died. For me, I'll speak for myself. What did it mean that my teacher was no longer in his body? What was my practice going to look like? How was I going to relate to my community and the world without the structure of having my teacher there in his body and a certain social framework set up? And I discovered how much I had constructed around my relationship with my teacher and my community that needed to be deconstructed. And a lot of it was deconstructed actually against my will, just by the circumstances of life. And I was left feeling a bit adrift. And now I live in Canada. It's like what I constructed internally, that's what needed to get deconstructed, not anything external. And as I was going through that process, which was very painful and confusing, at the same time, things were going on in the world more and more, as you all know. Obviously, things have been doing what they've been doing forever, but things were really amping up and getting more and more, honestly, frightening. And so as this internal structure was being broken down, there was a sense of external structures breaking down. And because I have a family with children, the question was, how do I hold all of this? How do I hold all of this for myself, for my children, and in relationship to the context of my spiritual life? So recently, over the past few years, what that's looked like has been finally coming full circle back around into a relationship specifically with my teacher and my lineage from a spiraled place. It's not going back to the way it was, but there's a way that it's very fresh and innocent, and it feels like something's being built, something's being fed, and I'm just really, really grateful for that. And I feel that as I put my attention on that, and as I feed that more and more, I'm discovering how that creates a container from which I can be in relationship with the things that are going on in the world in a more stable way. And a container in which I feel like I can actually share that sense of sanctuary with others. And I feel really drawn to do that. I feel really drawn to create sanctuary with others. So the body of light, for me, very directly, I'm not a woo-woo person, and that's kind of an insulting way to put it. What I mean is, I don't have vivid dreams or see visions. I'm certainly not psychic. I don't have any of that kind of sensitivity to the subtler bodies and the subtler domains. But I have a very strong intuition of those domains of existence. I have a very strong relationship to those things, even though I can't talk about it the way somebody who's really permeable to all of that could talk about it. And so for me, it really is a body of light. And the body of light relates very much to my own sense of an individual body of light that is in relationship with a larger field of light, a larger body of light, which is the body of my Sangha and our relationship with our lineage. Somehow for me right now, that's all a very living reality. I just have a very strong sense of that. And so while I want to stay informed, and I think it's really important to stay informed about what's happening in the world, I also feel like it's very easy, and I'm sure you all will agree, to get sucked in very quickly. And I think that process is not necessarily different than it's ever been, right? In relationship to the things that distract us. But I do think it's very magnified and very, very, very powerful. And I wanted to mention, actually, raise your hand if you've never heard of Robert Svoboda. Okay, so I'll just mention that Robert Svoboda, who was a friend of my teachers, they were colleagues, you could say. Robert Svoboda is a very highly respected and extraordinary yogi, doctor of Ayurveda, and teacher. And he studied in India with his teacher for many, many years. And he has extraordinary wisdom to share. And he has a podcast. A friend of his interviews him and records him on different subjects. And you can go and find that and listen to that. So the most recent one, because he's a practitioner of Jyotish astrology, he was using astrological imagery to describe what's happening in the world. And what I really love about listening to him is he talks about it in a way that is so grounded and so matter of fact. He's saying, we take it very personally what's happening, but these are larger forces at work. We are being affected. The planet's being affected. We're being affected by very specific forces. And the one he was talking about is called Rahu. So in Jyotish astrology, they look at 9 specific entities. 7 of them are the planets. And then 2 of them, Rahu and Ketu, are basically, they're called nodes. They're basically points in the sky that can be mapped. They're mapped, right? They're points in the sky where eclipses occur. And those points where those eclipses occur are considered beings, just as the different planets are considered to be beings, and they exert an influence. And the being of Rahu, this guy, Rahu, some people might say he's malevolent, but the way that Robert Svoboda was speaking of him is he's basically shadowy, right? Eclipses relates to darkness, relates to deception and confusion. And he didn't use the word narcissism, but basically an inflation, like inflation of ego and power. And traditionally, depending on your approach to your astrological chart, you might see the influence of Rahu on you as difficult, or you might see it, well, it's always going to be difficult, but you might also see it as useful for your spiritual practice, because it all depends on how you are able to contain and hold your attention and your practice and your energy while that influence is affecting you. So its influence can be very powerfully transformative, but you would have to be extremely resilient and awake and aware in order to make use of it that way. So, first of all, Rahu is very prominent in the birth chart of somebody who right now is the leader of the world. The free world? We don't know. But anyway, very prominent in that person's chart, first of all. Very prominent in the chart of the United States. If you take July 4th as the starting date of the country of the United States. And right now, since I believe he said 2009 or 2010, you'd have to listen to the podcast, but since then has been on this kind of war path, or this really very strong influence on the planet. And that's going to be happening until 2033, apparently, according to Robert Svoboda. So the point being, of course, the connection he's making is this is what's happening, and this is going to keep happening. And so the question is not, oh, how do we stop that from happening or get away from that happening? The question is, what do we do given that that is what's happening? And if it weren't happening based on this individual here or that individual there, it would still be happening. So for me, things like that, I just find that so helpful. I find that so helpful. It just depersonalizes it, and it gives me a chance to just step back and look at it in a very practical sense. So I want to stay informed because I don't want to be naive. I just want to know what's happening. But I also don't want to give too much attention to it. Many of you, I'm sure, are deeply aware of this principle that wherever you put your attention, you're feeding. Basically, our attention feeds things. In fact, it's from Robert Svoboda again that I heard this idea that wherever your attention goes, your prana goes, your prana being your life force. So you want to be really careful about what you're feeding. And so this takes me back to this idea of feeding the light. That's what I want to be feeding. I want to be feeding this body of light. And I have a very visceral sense of that right now, for which I am extremely grateful. I've known this for years and years and years, this principle of wherever your attention goes, your life force goes, and that's what you're feeding. But I guess it's part of this magnification process that Rahu is doing that makes it so much more obvious. Yeah, so I feel like there are just a lot of really strong practitioners in the room here. But in my thinking about this, this is also a very kind of a cliche idea, but how in order to feed this body of light, I need to build and maintain a space within which it can be there. And so that requires, obviously, a very strong, resilient body, mind, organism, which is one structure, and a resilient relationship structure. For me, that involves sort of the first concentric circle is my family. Then there's my friends. And then there's my Sangha, which there's a lot of overlap there, my community, and also my wider set of acquaintances. There needs to be stability for me in how I relate to people and how I relate to myself. And I need to take care of those relationships and take care of my body and take care of my mind. All of that needs to be happening so that I can hold this space for the body of light, and also be vulnerable with it. there has to be sanctuary so that I can be tender. I have to be protective of that space from the perspective of the delicacy of the mood of my relationship with that. And I've spent quite a few years now creating stability and structure in my life, which in one sense I could say, well, it would have been nice if I'd had that at the beginning of my life, and then I could have started with that. But I didn't, and that's okay. But even if one begins with that, I think the nature of life as a human is that we're constantly being deconstructed. So I think that the process of creating sanctuary is just a continuous, ongoing one. And one of the things I do to feed the light in my life is my son and I have a study practice we do together. He wouldn't call it that. I call it that. We read books together, and they're really cool, interesting books. And we really get into these things. And for a while, we were reading the journals of my teacher. And I felt like my son was developing a relationship with my teacher through these journals. It was really beautiful. And right now, we've just finished, I believe it's the first book by this gentleman, Martin Prechtel, and it's called Secrets of the Talking Jaguar. And Martin Prechtel was this young man back in the 70s. He's still around. He grew up in New Mexico, and somewhere around 18, 19, 20, he went traveling down through Mexico and ended up in Guatemala and ended up becoming part of this indigenous Mayan village that was still indigenous at the time. And it became a shaman and became a very important part of this village. And this culture that he became a part of was really a native culture for him. It was who he was, in essence. And this story, Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, is one of his stories about that. And he has many books. So we're going to keep reading these books. But one of the things that's very poignant in this book that is resonating with me right now is this idea of how important it is to be in relationship with the gods and the spirits. And the language he uses to talk about this is utterly beguiling, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful, the language he uses. And so I wanted to share with you some pieces of this that I feel resonate with the subject that I'm talking about and speak about these ideas from a little bit of a different angle. But before I do that, I wanted to see if anybody has any thoughts or questions. We could just pause for a moment and see if anything floats up to the top.
Clelia, speak about what you mean by light.
The few times that I've had any kind of experience of being in an altered state, somewhat, not like super, not like enlightened or anything like that, but just a somewhat altered state, it's always begun with just an experience of, it's a very visual experience of light, everything becoming very bright and vivid and suffused with light. And my gut instinct experience of that is that that's what's actually so all of the time. I'm not resting in a state of awareness where I see it, usually. And also, I've done some studying of teachings, and I've come across that as a description of an aspect of reality. My teacher was giving a talk, and it was one of the ordinary weekly talks he would give. I have to say right now, I'm just so full of affection for my teacher. He was something extraordinary. He would speak very off the cuff, and he'd make crude jokes, and it would seem very rambling, and he'd start out talking about one thing. Maybe he would read a quote from a Tibetan teacher, and he'd start explaining it, but then he'd go off on this tangent to the right and this tangent to the left, and we'd just talk about all different kinds of things. And at this time, I had taken on the practice of being a scribe. It was just something I decided to do. And I was literally practicing trying to write down every word he said. And this was really fun and really hard because he would go on these wild tangents. But the beauty of it was, as I got better and better at it, is that I'd go, oh, he just came back to where he was before. And I could see that all the time there was always this order. And I don't know, I could just feel how the whole thing was working. So anyway, during one of these talks, I believe I was scribing, he's going on one of these tangents and he's talking about blah, blah, blah. And then he says suddenly, you know, when I look out at all of you, what I see is a field of light. And you guys are all these little points out there in the field of light. And every now and then, one of them just lights up. And that's what I'm looking for. That's what he said. And then he just went on and blah, blah, blah. And he never said stuff like that. He just didn't talk about stuff like that very much, if ever. And so I wrote this down and I went, wait a minute, did he just say that? That was not the sort of thing he would normally say. So I remember that. And that kind of jives with my limited experience and my gut instinct, I guess I could say. And the reason I said feeding the body of light is that that field of light is just always there. It's never more, it's never less. You can't feed the whole thing, but there are these bodies of light. And what's that? That's like this joyful play of coming into existence and going out of existence and coming into existence. And that's what I am. That's what you are. The opportunity here is to be consciously in relationship with that, I feel.
Oh, as you're speaking, questions are coming to me, but I have two of them. That body of light, does that include Rahu? And also, you described Rahu as shadowy, deceptive, confusion with inflation of ego and power. And you said that the influence of Rahu is always difficult, but that it can be useful for your spiritual practice. How can you make that useful for your spiritual practice when those forces and energies are circling all around?
Yeah. Well, first of all of those things that I said are my rewordings of what I heard Robert Sabota say. So I'm not a Jyotish astrologer, and I would turn people to Robert Sabota and his books and his discussions of things like that, because I can't say I'm 100% on that. But I am 100% on the fact that I really do feel there are these forces at play in the world. There's no doubt about it. We look out and we see it. And how to make use of it, I don't know exactly how I can make use of that, but I feel that when I am in relationship with my practice and my teacher and my lineage, I trust that through that relationship, those energies will be able to be made useful. And maybe one of the ways they're useful is the amount of necessity it creates, because if things like that weren't going on, it'd be pretty easy just to kind of go, oh, things are fine. It creates a lot of necessity.
Whether you have a lineage and Sangha or not.
Yes. I'm guessing everybody has some sort of experience or relationship to this idea. Maybe somebody wouldn't call it a body of light, but some kind of relationship to this idea of a sacred domain in their life. And it could be something as simple as taking care of your family. It could be a relationship to Jesus. It could be service work, a particular kind of working in service in the world. Maybe there are some people who don't, but I would guess that it's not uncommon that people have a sense, an intuitive sense of something greater, bigger than oneself that one is in relationship to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a longing to be in relationship with that. And I think the more in touch with that longing one is, it's very likely that they would start to come across some sort of help to deepen that relationship.
maybe when there's such forces going on as there are today, one sees the need for that more, to connect with something more than oneself.
Yeah.
Or for the need for help.
Yeah.
I just want to clarify that feeding the body of light, or the field of light that permeates everything, is not limited to needing a teacher, a lineage, a sangha, but is something that is just much, much broader and vaster, that includes many people who don't identify with the sangha, for example, or a teacher, but are really doing a lot to feed the light in this world. And we can talk about all the different ways there are to do that. You named some of them, but it could be through social action. It can be through art. It can be through prayer.
Yeah.
It could be through kindness, just being kind. I think kindness plays a very big part in feeding the light.
Yeah.
And there's something about the intensity of darkness, I think, that really brings something to the surface in people that is a light that comes from within themselves, that they place into the world.
Yeah.
I think it's really creating a sense of urgency in many, many, many people.
Yeah, that's just so necessary to say, and so real. And yeah, when I'm talking about the body of light, I don't mean there's only one. There's only one field of light, all of reality, but I have a body of light, and you have a body of light, and everybody here has a body of light. I imagine it like we all have these little lamps in here. And it's like when you meet someone and you know that they're feeding the light, you just see that, you recognize that, right? You feel it in that person. It's not even about what form that's taking in the external world, because whatever form it's taking, it has the same effect of feeding that. Yeah.
Sometimes it seems like in my life that the intention to form a body of light is not necessarily on my mind.
Right.
And if I were to intend to build a body of light, I'm not convinced that I could do that. And it's the fruit of my efforts. It's not an intentional go at it type of idea.
Yeah. For me, it's not trying to create or build a body of light. What I can do is create a space. I can take care of myself and my nervous system and my relationships and my mind. And that's holding a space where it's coming into play. And then there's the feeding it. I also want to say that this idea of feeding the body of light might sound very nice, but sometimes what feeds the light can be quite intense. It's not like a sleepy process, and it's not like a fluffy cloud process. I was making dinner the other night and hadn't done this in a while. I looked up on YouTube my teacher's name. I pulled him up. And there aren't very many videos of him out there, but this was a video of him speaking. Lee Lozowick. I think he was in Canada. So I'm listening to this while I'm making dinner. I feel like maybe it was a public talk because he was being more provocative. And it woke me up. I was like having a sense of humor about the mechanicality that I get stuck in and my drive to be comfortable and the ways that I deceive myself. He was very good at poking at those things, this mind stream of clarity, this vivid presence and awareness. And that really feeds the light. That was feeding the light in me, listening to him talk like that and say things that he knew were going to make some people get up and leave. May I read a little bit from this book I've been reading? Yeah? Okay. This is really good stuff. This first piece is on remembrance. Here we go. I know not everybody's read this guy's stories. I might need to explain some parts of it. So this is during his process of training with the elder shaman who took him in and was training him to be a shaman. And part of the duty of a shaman was to feed the deities, feed the gods, feed the spirits, so that the village could stay alive. Not only did we owe our births to the deities of the other layers, but our tactile life of movement and eating, the earth fruit existence, was fueled and kept alive by other deities and forces living in these same other worlds, spirit worlds. Just like the tree, our world was the fruit, and the deities were the roots, the trunk, heartwood, and bark. And through these, the gods of the other worlds pumped the sap of life into our world, where we enjoyed what they could not. Though the old gods and deities of the layers made our lives possible, they still had to stay in their own worlds. Yet this fifth world that we live in is so delicious that they desire it. A spiritual contract between the people of the village and the gods said that they would keep life coming to us if we promised to send them remembrance. The fruit of our remembrance was this earth and our lives. We had to send them some of its deliciousness by means of ritual. Just as each villager worked hard to carry his or her own weight in the economy of each family compound, the village as a whole had to maintain the spiritual expense of its existence by giving the food of remembrance to the spirits, gods, and forces of the magnificent layers of the other worlds. Just like the old people in the village, the gods were never left out or forgotten. We always sent to the elders gifts, food, and a percentage of whatever we had to remember them by keeping them well-fed and healthy. By remembering our elders, we learned not to forget the gods. The old reminded us today to feed what had fed us as people up until now. The gods gave us life so that we could remember them, to keep them alive. The gods of all layers ate remembrance. The gods gave us things they didn't have so we could create beautiful rituals, speeches, objects, and ways of being that remembered. Put the gods together again, just like they did us in the womb. A forgotten god was an angry god or a dead god. In either case, the life sap would stop flowing, and all this life would be as if it had never existed. We would cease. All of our rituals in the village, whether personal or public, were memory feasts for the spirits. Being remembered was their food. Our forgetfulness of where we came from killed life and the gods, and was a major impediment to a happy life. Whew.
It's kind of hopeless when I sense the culture that surrounds me as far as a relationship to a higher power of any sort, no less to God's. I can't be responsible for that. I can just begin to look in myself and see where that resonates. One of the things that interests me is that in prayer, we have this thing about relationship to God, like we're always asking God for stuff.
Right.
The gods are these big Santa Clauses in the sky. And the gods you're talking about are also always blessing and giving and helping. But how many of our rituals are offerings, which is why some of those Vedic rituals, they're constantly putting something into the fire, putting light, putting incense. and to recognize that God relies upon the food that we can offer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a whole different way of looking at creation. In the Gurdjieff work, they talk about the absolute. How does one feed the absolute?
Yeah, in the stories that Martine Prechtel is telling, it's very indigenous, animistic, maybe that's the right word. It's very organic and in direct relationship to plants and animals and mountains and holes in the ground. It's everything is alive. And even though my form of feeding what I'm calling the body of light is maybe different, that context or that mood of it just really resonates with me. It's not asking favors, although sometimes I might. I don't so much anymore say, help me be strong, help me, whatever. It's more for me, what I do is I see my mind feeding something else. In the Gurdjieff work, I think they talk about feeding the moon. I'm on the internet and I'm looking at the news. Okay, I'm feeding the moon. I'm feeding some other kind of entities that I don't want to feed. And I just stop and I go do one of my rituals, or I read a book like this or another book that puts my attention on the body of light. It feeds my light. I feel it feeding my light. I read those paragraphs to you and I'm just really juiced up by it. Yeah.
Wow, there was this sentence, the gods gave us life so we would remember them.
Yeah.
What occurred to me about that is we've been given a gift and, we need to give something back. And then I was thinking there are rituals and those kind of things, but also to give something to each other. I would have to think that fed the gods in some way too. I mean, I don't know so much the subtle realms, but I would have to think by supporting and genuinely helping each other, others, anyone who we come across, that would feed as well. I'm just thinking this morning, I was at a men's group and I was just really struck by how these people, these guys that I'd not known before, were there for each other. And that just seemed to feed something higher.
Yeah, for years, I've been wanting to start a women's group. And finally, 2 months ago, stepped out of my comfort zone and just invited a few friends to join me for, I'm calling it the spiritual friendship circle. And it's a step out for me too, because I have my teacher and my path and my Sangha, but I realized it's really about whoever I am connected to. Like, let's do this. Let's feed the thing. Let's do it. And the first time we met, it's not a lot of us. I felt like a being was born that was the being of this particular configuration of people, and that we were feeding it just by our presence with one another there. It felt so tangible and powerful. So yeah, it takes different forms. And I think our instinct can sense when we come across it or slip into it.
We've developed a lot on the path, all of us, in whatever ways. And to share that genuinely and open-heartedly, to me, that would be kind of paying back, just a natural movement.
Yeah.
Not to be in the either or world, but I think there's a distinction to feeding the gods specifically and to feeding others. I think the gods are very specific, and that is nice to note in my world.
Hey, maybe we could do both.
Well, I don't think they're actually as separate as we might think. Okay. This one, the heading is the function of humans. You ready for another one? Tsuttajil shamans called human beings in respect names the Kop Riashiliu, earrings of the earth fruit. It was human grandiosity that carved, cut, hammered, and bent the earth into shapes it didn't ask to be in. How could that make us welcome here on this earth among the spirits? But our very ability to carve, bend, and shape should be used to feed and give gifts to what fed us from the other world. After all, they could kill us in a flash. Why didn't they? Because the gods were addicted to our beauty like an alcoholic to a delicious wine. They loved our poetry, our offering shrines, our beautiful clothing, the complex chirping banter of our village streets, and especially the expansive combination of all our abilities into ritual offerings and ceremonies. The gods perceived us as delicious fruit. They loved our excesses as long as they were beautiful, and the gods got to eat a lot of them. In a shamanic initiation, one could see the complex beauty of all life and nature in one soul rewiring flash, recognizing at the same time the over-domesticated idiocy of humans and their persistent preoccupation with creating more and more spirit-insulting, life-killing ways. Humans had forgotten their function. It was hard for me to want to serve humans now that I had drunk directly out of the belly of Relage Venak, having spoken with gods and been willing to die to see my father's face. But ironically, because of the vision this gave me, I comically realized that humans were part of that very nature they insulted with their prodigious amnesia. Even that forgetfulness was a part of their nature. To the spirit, the noise of the humans was just about the same size as a mockingbird's song or a cricket's chirp. We weren't that big to them. I knew that the nature now bubbling alive in me, my shaman's soul, was a remembered thing. All humans had natural souls, they just didn't remember. Spiritual amnesia was the price of human cleverness. So this idea that the gods were even fed by the chattering in the village streets. So when I think, well, there's a difference, as you say, between feeding the gods or feeding God and feeding people, I feel like it's not quite as dualistic a thing. Yeah, it's like being able to be present with one another in a wholehearted way, in a real way, and with that sense of remembrance at the same time, that remembrance of the greater body of which we are a part. I feel like that is very much of a piece with that. I don't know if that resonates for you.
I just know that for myself, my people world is where I can get lost, so to speak. And when I do the rituals, I just feel the feeding is more specific for me. I don't think there's a distinction. I just can get lost in me in the people world.
Totally with you on that. Yes. And for me, it's definitely been many years of a process of trying to find my center and work on my mind and my psychology and my psyche so that when I'm among people, I'm not giving myself away. But even then, I have to be careful. I have to be careful and I have to protect that space.
A small technical question. Could you please give me the spelling of Robert Svoboda's surname?
Svoboda.
Cool. Okay. I would never have got that in a million years. Thank you. And he was a friend and colleague of Lee's.
Yes. Yeah, they had a friendship. You know, as I think teachers often do, you know, they work with students and then they have more of their peers where they can really serve and support and reflect to one another. And that's important for teachers to have those colleagues.
So there's the light, there's the darkness. Sometimes the darkness is sacred. It's not like darkness is bad and light is always good. But another way, I think, to language it is to just say that we're feeding the sacred.
Mm.
And the sacred can include both the light and the darkness. I'm not saying darkness as evil, full of hatred. I don't mean it quite like that. But there's a lot of different permutations and nuances of darkness that are beautiful too. And I think that that's a way that I could look at it, because what we see in this world is just a complete absence of the sacred.
Yeah.
And a complete absence of beauty. And that's what feeds the sacred. Beauty feeds the sacred. I learned that from Martine Prechtel, that beauty feeds the sacred. And so I think any way that we recognize that we turn towards the sacred and feed the sacred is feeding the body of light.
Yeah, that distinction, that's really important. That phrase, body of light, could really be misleading that way, couldn't it? The important part for me is the idea of a body. I think that's important for me right now, because part of what's happening in the world today is there is just too much, too much information. I mean, yes, there's a lot of horrible stuff, but there's also just too much good stuff. You could do this workshop, you could do that workshop. Various teachings are available online on the internet. You could find this, you could find that. You could go chat with somebody in a cafe and they're like, I'm doing Tantra and I'm doing this. And it's like all over the place. A part of the past few years for me has been finding a way to come back to myself and notice, what is the specific thing for me? What is my specific relationship to the sacred? And it's not to diminish any other access to the sacred. It's only to say, it's really important for me to limit where I'm putting my attention. So I'm not just putting it all over the place. Yeah. So something about this idea of a body, a being, a sense of a livingness that I have a relationship to. Because when I say feeding the sacred, it's very broad and almost abstract. So I guess that it's more the body that's almost more important to me, although the body of light piece is very visceral as my experience of something. But yeah, you could use different language for that.
What I like to imagine is that whatever is happening is the sacred. When I can be strong enough to imagine that, because it takes a lot of strength for me, there's a comfort that can happen. And it seems like an exchange can happen more easily. And I want to have that exchange. And if I am doing a no, no, no versus the yes, I just find that the yes provides an exchange. I'm fed. I'm feeling like an instrument in the process more. And it shuts me up. Actually, I quit complaining so much, which is always nice.
Yeah, that could be a whole different conversation, the conversation of yes and no.
Yeah, when I'm saying yes, I need to be stronger, to be fed more energy. And that's a great place for me. I prefer that than kind of a false strength of saying this is bad and this is good or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be honest about ourselves and to know ourselves well enough. Each of us has to navigate our individual little path, and there's no black and white way to do it or talk about it. Let's see, I've got so many good things to read, but I do want to read at least one more. I titled this one, Don't Drop the Baby. Okay, so this is toward the end of this book. So he's been there in the 70s, and I don't know anything about what happened in Guatemala, but there was some kind of civil war. And what that looked like from his perspective, from the perspective of these indigenous people living in these small villages, was basically that they were just destroyed. They were just caught in the middle of this, whatever it was that was happening. And so he ended up having to leave. he didn't want to leave, but his teacher, his mentor, said, you have to go. You have to take the bundles. So the bundles, I'll just quickly describe. In their shamanic work, they would use dreams, and in their dreams, they would see certain objects. And then in their waking life, they would go and they would find this object and they would add it to this sacred bundle. And this sacred bundle, these were the objects that they used in order to feed those particular spirits that were related to those objects. And each shaman had a bundle, but also the village had a bundle. So it's this sacred bundle. So he refers to that in here. All right, so this is his mentor speaking to him. Also, if you see your friends and relatives killed, your village burned, our women folks split and raped like stepped on fruit, do not go to fight on one side or the other. We know you. I know you. The gods know you. The Nawal Achi know you. And we know you are a good warrior, capable of destroying the enemy. But the real enemy cannot be killed that way. You must carry the baby, the bundles, the knowledge, the songs, and the ways, without pulling out your machete, without drawing your weapon. Because to win against what you hate and perceive as the enemy, you will need all your power. And in the instant you draw your weapon, you'll have to drop the baby. And that baby must never hit the ground. If you drop the bundles to fight what you hate, there will be no justifiable reason for your battle, because you will have lost the reason for the fight, which in your case is to keep this living thing, the baby, the bundle ways, alive. Men who are cowards must be made to fight, and most will lose their lives but gain their courage. Men like yourself with ability and the warrior spirit in their blood must, like all of us, make a sacrifice in these desperate times that are beginning already. And your sacrifice will be having to refuse to fight, though every fiber of your being says you must. When you see your friends and loved ones cut and killed, it will be so hard for you not to retaliate, but you mustn't. You must carry what gives us life. The true enemy is not a specific people, but is a force that takes these people over and makes them powerless, then offers them revenge over what their primitive minds think is killing them. The baby must be carried by you through the rain and hail of bullets, through the hoop of fire, to be planted, to make more of itself, beyond either one of us, so that the enemy cannot kill what gave all things their lives. I mean, that one it felt so relevant. It felt so relevant. Keep the sacred, the baby, the bundles, whatever it is that's your relationship to the sacred. Keep that alive. Keep holding that. Don't drop it. Don't forget it.
Yeah, it puts in mind the tremendous suffering that the Tibetans went through in order to carry that precious bundle to the West.
Yeah.
That regime was, moving through the most sacred places and destroying it and killing people. And yet certain individuals were able to carry that through. And how we've profited from that is just unbelievable, how we've profited from those who've carried that bundle.
Yeah. We can't see the big picture. We can't know. But I think what we can know is what's right in front of us and what our hearts and our instincts and our souls tell us is right here in front of us to do. What we can feed, what sanctuary we can create with one another and for one another. which is why I feel it's always such an honor to speak, and I feel so grateful.
I wanted to ask you about something that was in your description and see if you had anything to say. One of the things that you say is that it's sometimes called the practice body. This body of light is an ever-burning flame that protects the ongoing existence of human life on our planet. And you have a quote, "Lovers of God are responsible for our actual continuation as a race and as a planetary, even universal culture." How do you see that?
Well, I mean, I think that's very similar to what Martin Prechtel is talking about in here, right? That feeding the gods, feeding the village heart is what keeps existence alive, and that the gods could kill us any moment. They keep us alive because they get to experience through us. And that quote from my teacher, Lee, it's in a little book called The Only Grace is Loving God, which is one of my favorite of his books. The mood of it is very strong and I love it. It reminds me of the Krishna Lila, the idea that the whole play of the creation is the play of God. And God comes into existence as all these separate beings in order to experience the play and the Lila, and to experience love and devotion and adoration and beauty. And so by attending to those things in our life, we're attending to what the whole thing is about.
Seems like we've done pretty good at forgetting as a race, as a culture.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did I just read in there? It was something about our amazing amnesia, and it's part of the cleverness that makes us be able to do that which the gods want us to do, and that's sort of the price of it, and they're simultaneous somehow. Yeah, I think we covered it. I think there's a lot there to digest and hopefully to inspire. Really appreciate everybody's presence, taking the time to come and help feed the light.